Hospital director humiliates black teen on playground and discovers he is the son of the woman who will decide his future. If you enjoy the stories, please subscribe. It will greatly help the channel. The afternoon sun bathed the playground of Fue, the Royal Gardens condominium, one of the city's most exclusive. Patricia Mendez adjusted her designer sunglasses while watching with disdain the black teenager sitting on one of the benches, absorbed in a book. "Excuse me?" Her voice sliced through the air like a knife. "This playground is for residents only." Lucas lifted his eyes from the chemistry book, his serene face contrasting with Patricia's hostility. "I know, ma'am. I'm waiting for my mother." "Your mother?" Patricia scoffed. "And who would your mother be?" "I'd rather not say." Lucas returned to his book, maintaining the calm his mother always taught him. Patricia took out her phone, her perfectly manicured fingers gliding over the screen. "Hello, police. There's a suspicious individual in the condominium's playground." Lucas slowly closed the book, tucking it into his backpack. His mind wandered, back to a few hours earlier when he was studying in his room. "Mom, do I really have to go with you today?" "Son, you know I have an important meeting. It'll just be for a few hours." "Okay, but that condominium, the people there aren't very—" "They are just like anyone else, Lucas. And you deserve to be there just as much as anyone." The sound of sirens interrupted his memory. 2 patrol cars stopped at the entrance of the playground, and Patricia smiled triumphantly. "See? Now you'll have to explain what you're doing here." "Ma'am? What's the situation?" asked one of the officers, approaching. "This young man is trespassing in our private area. He doesn't live here." Lucas remained seated, his slightly trembling hands the only sign of his nervousness. "I'm waiting for my mother, who is in a meeting at one of the houses." "What's your mother's name?" the officer asked. Before Lucas could reply, a 3rd car entered the condominium. It wasn't a regular patrol car. It was an official black vehicle with state government plates. Patricia frowned, her confidence wavering for the first time. "What car is that?" The vehicle stopped near the playground, and the uniformed driver got out to open the back door. Lucas smiled, recognizing the sound of heels approaching. "I think your question is about to be answered, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a calmness that made Patricia take a step back. The sound of heels approaching echoed through the playground as Patricia Mendez nervously adjusted her designer blazer. Around her, neighbors' phones were already raised, capturing every moment of the incident. "Ridiculous," she muttered, trying to maintain her authoritative posture. Probably just another one of those social workers trying to stir things up. As the director of the Central Hospital, Patricia was used to being the highest authority in any environment. Her office on the top floor of the hospital was a monument to her power. Framed diplomas, excellence awards, photos with politicians and business people. "Mrs. Mendez," called a neighbor filming the scene, "maybe we should wait." "Wait," Patricia cut in, her voice sharp. "I built my reputation in this condominium. I won't let anyone come in here and—" "Anyone, Mrs. Mendez?" The voice coming from behind her made Patricia freeze. It was a voice that carried natural authority without needing to shout or intimidate. Several neighbors watching the scene began to whisper among themselves, some recognizing the figure approaching. One of them let out an audible, "My God!" "Marcos," Patricia called one of the condominium's security guards, "get this boy out of here immediately." The guard, however, did not move. His eyes were fixed on the woman who was now next to Lucas. "How dare you—" Patricia began, turning to confront the newcomer, but the words died in her throat. Lucas calmly stood up, grabbing his backpack. "Mom, you didn't need to come. The meeting—" "The meeting can wait," the woman replied, her eyes locked on C. "Patricia, some things are more important." One of the police officers approached, visibly embarrassed. "Doctor, we apologize, we didn't know—" "Of course you didn't know," she replied, her voice steady. Just like Mrs. Mendez didn't know who the suspicious element she reported was. Patricia felt the blood drain from her face. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from the president of the hospital board. How had the news spread so quickly? "This is a misunderstanding," she tried to explain, her voice losing its previous arrogance. "I was just ensuring safety." "Safety?" The woman raised an eyebrow. My son, sitting quietly, studying, poses a threat to safety. More cars began to arrive at the condominium. Journalists, alerted by the videos already circulating on social media, clustered at the gate. Mrs. Mendez, one of the residents, approached, showing his phone. You're trending on Twitter. The video, it... Patricia grabbed the phone with trembling hands. The hashtag racist director had already amassed thousands of shares. This is going to ruin my career, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Interesting that this is your first concern, Lucas's mother noted, not the fact that you publicly humiliated an innocent teenager. Lucas gently touched his mother's arm. Mum, can we go? I have a test tomorrow. The simplicity and dignity of Lucas's request made several of those present lower their heads in shame. Of course, son. She turned to leave, but paused for a moment. Oh, Mrs. Mendez, we will meet again soon. We have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow at the hospital, don't we? Patricia paled even more. Meeting? Yes. About the new state. Guidelines for hospital administration. I can't wait to discuss inclusion. As mother and son walked towards the official car, the residents began to disperse, leaving Patricia alone with her mistake and its consequences. Her phone vibrated again. It was another message from the hospital board, more urgent than the first. Extraordinary meeting in 1 hour. Your presence is mandatory. Patricia watched the official car pull away, a cold feeling spreading through her body. Who exactly was that woman? And why did it seem like everyone knew her except for her? The answer would come sooner than she imagined, and it would be much more devastating than she could anticipate. The silence in the Central Hospital's conference room was deafening. Patricia Mendez occupied her usual chair at the head of the table, but for the first time in 15 years, she did not feel in control. The board had just handed her a folder with a name that made her stomach sink. Dr. Helena Santos, State Secretary of Health. The same woman, she whispered, flipping through the file with trembling hands. The board president, Dr. Roberto, cleared his throat. Patricia, do you have any idea of the gravity of what has happened? Dr. Helena is not just the health secretary, she is the one who will decide the future of the state funding for our hospital. The pages of the file told a story that Patricia should have known. Helena Santos graduated with honors from Harvard, master's in public health policies, doctorate in hospital management. A brilliant career built on determination and excellence. But she never mentioned having a child. Patricia tried to defend herself. Maybe because people like you never asked, a voice replied from the door. Helena Santos entered the room, her presence commanding immediate respect. The impeccable blazer and pearl necklace contrasted with the red folder she carried, the same color as the book Lucas was reading on the playground. Dr. Santos, Dr. Roberto quickly stood up. We didn't expect you so soon. Some situations require immediate attention, Helena replied, sitting down. Like when the director of one of the largest hospitals in the state shows explicit bias against a black teenager. Patricia felt her face burn. It was a misunderstanding. No, Ms. Mendez, Helena interrupted her. A misunderstanding is apologizing after bumping into someone. What you did has a specific name. Helena opened her folder and pulled out an old, yellowed piece of paper. It was a resume, dated 15 years ago. Do you remember this, Patricia? Furrowed her brow, confused. This was the resume I sent to this hospital 15 years ago. I had just returned from Harvard, pregnant with Lucas. You interviewed me in person. The memory hit Patricia like a punch. The young, highly qualified pregnant doctor she had dismissed with some excuse. I don't remember. Of course you don't. To people like you, we are invisible, unless we are invading your privileged spaces. The board watched the confrontation in tense silence. Helena continued, After that interview, I promised myself I would reach a position where I could change the system, where people like you could no longer close doors based solely on someone's skin color. Patricia felt tears welling up. Please, I could lose my job, just as I could have lost an opportunity 15 years ago. The difference is that today I am in a position to ensure that this doesn't happen to anyone else. Helena pulled out another document from her folder. This is the new state program for inclusion and diversity in health institutions. Every hospital will have specific goals for hiring and promoting black professionals and other minorities. The board began to murmur. Helena raised her hand, asking for silence. And Central Hospital will be the pilot project. You, Patricia, will have the opportunity to lead this transformation. Of course, if you still want to keep your position. But how? Consider it a chance for redemption. The same chance you never gave others. Helena stood up, organizing her papers. By the way, Lucas came first in the chemistry mock exam today. The same book he was reading when you considered him a threat. Patricia hung her head, tears now streaming down her face. The board has 24 hours to present me with an implementation plan for the program, Helena announced. And Miss Mendes, I suggest you use this time to reflect on what kind of leader you want to be going forward. As Helena walked toward the door, she paused for a moment. Oh, and one more thing. Lucas asked me to say that he forgives you. He has a bigger heart than I do. When the door closed, silence returned to the room. But now it was a different silence, a silence of transformation. Patricia looked at Helena's file once more, realizing there was much more to this story than she could imagine. And something told her that the surprises were not over yet. Patricia's phone notification blinked again. It was the 10th in less than an hour. The video of the playground incident had already garnered over 2 million views, and the hashtag racist principal was still trending. It's a nightmare, she murmured, closing the curtains of her hospital office. Outside, a small crowd of journalists was gathered, waiting for a statement. Her phone rang. It was Sandra, her press officer. Patricia, the situation is out of control. 3 major sponsors have already signaled they might terminate contracts with the hospital. How can we break contracts? The incident has nothing to do with the hospital. It has everything to do, Sandra replied, her voice tense. You are the face of the institution, and now that face is being linked to— Don't say that word, Patricia cut in. I am not racist, a voice completed from the door. Dr. Roberto was standing there, holding a folder full of papers. His normally friendly face was serious. The board is gathered, he said. We need you there, now. Patricia followed him through the hospital corridors, feeling the staff's stares. Some averted their eyes, while others openly glared at her disapprovingly. In the boardroom, the expressions were even more severe. The numbers are concerning, Dr. Roberto began, distributing reports. Besides the sponsors, 3 renowned doctors have already requested to resign. Social media is in uproar, and we've just received a letter signed by over 200 employees demanding a response. But I already apologized, Patricia protested. I issued a statement. A generic statement is not enough, Dr. Mariana interrupted, the only black board member. You have no idea the damage you've caused, do you? The door opened again. It was Helena Santos. In fact, she said, entering with more papers, the damage is much greater than you think. She turned on the projector, displaying a series of graphs. In the last 5 years under Dr. Mendes's management, only 2% of hires were black professionals. Of those, none were in leadership positions. Patricia felt her blood run cold. She had no idea about these numbers. But this isn't my fault. She tried to argue. The resumes that came in— The resumes? Helena smiled without humor. Like mine. 15 years ago? The silence in the room was heavy. The governor just called me, Helena continued. He is worried about the fallout. After all, Central Hospital receives millions in state funding. Patricia sank into her chair. It was the end of her career. However, Helena proceeded, I have a different proposal. Everyone turned to her, curious. Instead of simply punishing, we can turn this moment into an opportunity for real change. She distributed new documents. This is the project I mentioned yesterday. A comprehensive diversity and inclusion program. But not just numbers on paper. We want a cultural shift. And where does Dr. Mendes fit into this? Dr. Roberto asked. She will be responsible for implementing it, Helena replied. Under my direct supervision, of course. Patricia looked up, surprised. Why? Because sometimes, Helena replied, the best way to combat prejudice is to force people to see their own mistakes up close. At that moment, a new notification popped up on everyone's phones. It was a video from Lucas. "My name is Lucas Santos," he said in the recording. "And yesterday I was a victim of racism in the place where my mother had an important meeting. But I don't want the lady who reported me to be punished. I want her to learn." Patricia felt tears welling up again. "This video has already reached 500,000 views," Helena remarked. "My 15-year-old son is showing more maturity than many adults." She turned to Patricia. "So, Dr. Mendez, do you accept the challenge? Are you willing to really change?" Before Patricia could respond, her phone vibrated again. It was a message from her 17-year-old daughter. "Mom, how could you? He's my age. He could be my friend from school." At that moment, something inside Patricia broke. "I accept," she said, her voice choked. "Tell me what I need to do." Helena smiled, but her eyes remained serious. "Great, because tomorrow you have a meeting scheduled with someone very special." "Who?" "Lucas. He wants to personally show you the social project he created to help young people from the outskirts study medicine." The whole council held their breath. The transformation was just beginning. The community center in Villa Esperanza looked nothing like the luxurious environments that Patricia was used to visiting. The walls needed painting, and the air conditioning worked only partially, but there was something different in the air, a contagious energy from the young people filling the small library. Lucas was in front of a group explaining chemistry formulas. His voice was calm and instructional, the same serenity he had shown during the incident on the playground. "Come in," he said, noticing Patricia and Helena at the door. "We're almost done with the review for the entrance exam," Patricia observed. The young, hopeful faces. All black, all from the periphery, all dreaming of a white coat. "How many students do you have here?" she asked, her voice low. 35, Lucas replied. "We started with 5 2 years ago. Each one who passes the entrance exam comes back to help the newcomers." Helena smiled with pride. "Lucas started this when he was 13. That was when he realized there were no black doctors at the hospital where I worked." "I didn't know," Patricia began, but Helena interrupted her. "There are many things you don't know, Dr. Mendez. For example, do you know who the janitor was who worked at the Central Hospital for 30 years and retired last month?" Patricia frowned, confused. "His name is Jorge," Helena continued. "He has 2 children who graduated in medicine. Both tried to work at your hospital. Both were rejected without an interview." The revelation hit Patricia like a punch. How many times had she walked past Jorge without even noticing his existence? "But today we're not here to talk about the past," Helena said. "Lucas has a proposal for you." The young man gathered his students in a circle, including Patricia. "Our biggest difficulty," he explained, "is getting internships and practical experience. The students need to see what a hospital is like inside, understand the routine. You want me to—" Patricia began to understand. "We want to transform the Central Hospital into an inclusive training center," Lucas continued. "Not just for medical students, but for everyone who dreams of working in healthcare." One of the students, Maria, shyly raised her hand. "I want to be a nurse," she said. "But when I went to the hospital last week with my grandmother, the receptionist didn't even look at me when I asked about the internship program." Each story felt like a small needle in Patricia's heart. Stories of closed doors, interrupted dreams, wasted talents. "I can change that," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I can open the doors I've kept shut for so long." Helena watched carefully, looking for signs of sincerity in Patricia's words. "It won't be easy," she warned. "There's resistance within the hospital itself." "Like my own resistance?" Patricia asked, a sad smile on her lips. "Exactly." Lucas gathered some papers and handed them to Patricia. "This is our complete project. I prepared it that afternoon in the playground while I waited for my mom." Patricia flipped through the pages, impressed by the depth and maturity of the work. "Why don't you hate me?" she suddenly asked. "After what I did." Lucas thought for a moment before responding. "Because hate only breeds more hate. And I learned from my mum that real change comes from education, not revenge." Helena placed her hand on her son's shoulder, proud. "So, Dr. Mendez," she said, "are you ready for your true lesson?" "What lesson?" that sometimes we need to lose everything we think is important to find what really matters. At that moment, Patricia's phone buzzed. It was a notification from the hospital board. Her position as director was officially under review. "I just lost my job, didn't I?" she asked, oddly calm. "No," Helena replied. "You just gained the chance to earn it back." Lucas smiled, extending his hand to Patricia. "Ready to start over?" Patricia looked at that outstretched hand, at the young people around, at Helena. In her 15 years as director, she had never felt the weight of responsibility as she did. At that moment, "Ready," she replied, shaking Lucas's hand. And so, in the unlikely setting of a community library in the outskirts, a new story began. A story of redemption, transformation, and above all, hope. 6 months had passed since that afternoon at the community center. The Central Hospital was different, not just in appearance, with its new posters about diversity and inclusion, but in its essence. Patricia was in her office, no longer on the top floor, but on the ground floor, close to the reception, where she could see and be seen by everyone. "Dr. Mendez," Maria called, now an intern in the nursing program. "The new residents have arrived." Patricia smiled as she stood up. In the hallway, 20 young, newly graduated doctors were waiting, half of them black, a striking contrast to previous cohorts. "Welcome to Central Hospital," she began. "Each of you represents a change that took too long to happen." Her eyes found Lucas among the attendees, not as a resident, he was still in his 3rd year of high school, but as the coordinator of the mentoring program that had become a model for other hospitals. "6 months ago," Patricia continued, "I was a different person, someone who confused power with privilege, who saw differences as threats." The murmuring in the hallway ceased. Everyone knew the story. She had become a case study in hospital, management and institutional transformation. But I learned in the hardest way that true leadership is not about keeping people outside, but about opening doors. Helena Santos entered the hallway, now not only as the Secretary of Health, but as the President of the new National Council for Health Equity. "Dr. Mendez," she said, "the first semester numbers have arrived." Patricia grabbed the report, her hands trembling slightly. Central Hospital had become a reference in inclusion, with patient satisfaction rates hitting records. "But these aren't just numbers," Helena continued. "They are transformed lives." Lucas approached, carrying a familiar folder, the same one he had held in the playground that day. "Mrs. Mendez," he said, "do you remember when you asked me why I didn't hate you?" Patricia nodded, feeling tears welling up. "Because I knew that sometimes people need a mirror to see their own prejudice. And you didn't just see it. You decided to break the mirror and rebuild something new." The young man opened the folder, revealing photos of the social project that now occupied an entire floor of the hospital. Dozens of young people from the outskirts taking tutoring classes, preparing for entrance exams, and most importantly, finding hope. "The program already has branches in 5 hospitals," Helena informed, "all following the model that you and Lucas developed." Patricia looked around, at the eager residents ready to begin, at Maria organizing medical records, at patients being treated with dignity regardless of their color or origin. "Do you know what's most ironic?" she asked Helena. "I thought I would lose everything that day, my position, my respect, my power, but in fact, you gained something much bigger," Helena completed. "You gained humanity." Lucas smiled as he took his white coat, an early gift from his mother. "I still have 2 years before I get to wear this for real," he said. "But now I know that when my turn comes, I won't be the only one." Patricia watched the moment, remembering all the times she had closed doors on people like Lucas. How had she been blind for so long? "Prejudice is a locked door," Helena said, as if reading her thoughts. "But the key has always been on the inside." At that moment, a nurse rushed over. "Dr. Mendez, there's a situation in the emergency room. A lady, she's refusing to be seen by a black doctor." Patricia and Helena exchanged glances. It was time to put everything they had learned into practice. "I'll handle this," Patricia said, her voice firm, "because now I know exactly what to say." As she walked toward the emergency room, Patricia reflected on how an afternoon at the playground had changed not only her life, but the lives of so many others. The prejudice that nearly destroyed her career had transformed into a force for change, and when she entered the emergency room, ready to confront another case of prejudice, she was no longer the same Patricia Mendez from 6 months ago. She was someone who had learned that true strength lies not in exclusion but in inclusion. Sometimes, she thought, we need to lose ourselves completely to truly find ourselves. And so, Central Hospital continued its transformation, not just of walls and protocols, but of hearts and minds. A place where the white coat had no color, where knowledge had no barriers, and where humanity finally spoke louder than prejudice. It was just the beginning of a new era in healthcare, and it all started with a teenager reading a chemistry book in a playground.